My name is Alex Grant, and I'm here for another edition of Mic Drop. Today, I want to discuss this series that's become quite popular, and it's quite thought-provoking, and it's on Netflix under the title of Maid. It's the story of a main character by the name of Alex, who finds herself in a relationship with quite an important component of domestic violence. And she is a single mom, and she runs away or makes the attempt to escape this relationship and finds herself working as a maid. And this opens up a door for her to begin to build a life of independence and being able to be self-sustaining in order to achieve her total financial and personal freedom for her well-being and the well-being of her daughter. I thought it's a very interesting series, and it's actually one that gets us thinking about domestic violence in a different way. Because often when we think of domestic violence, we only think about the physical aggression that happens in a domestic violence situation. But there are many other forms of violence that take place that we don't always take notice of, and we're not so cognizant of them. Sometimes the violence takes place in the form of financial control or abuse. It takes the form of psychological and verbal abuse. It takes the form of an emotional badgering of a person, and being presented with the situation of not always being able to speak for yourself, make decisions for yourself, be treated with respect and dignity. And all these things do take a toll on the a person's self-esteem, the sense of empowerment, the sense of dignity in order to face situations that we all should face as individual and as people and as adults. But I want us to get thinking about how do we define domestic violence, because we might become so accustomed of certain abusive situations that we may fail to even acknowledge that they exist as such. We can get used to certain forms of abuse, disrespect, boundaries being crossed, being undermined by the people that we live with. It can happen with a spouse or a partner, but it can also happen with a parent. It can happen with an older brother, an older sister. It can happen with just about anyone that we live with. And there might be some things that we can become accustomed to, not having to necessarily, not in our best interest, but just getting used to us allowing ourselves to be disrespected in so many different ways. Sometimes we also need to think about who is the perpetrator of the abuse, because historically we've been presented with the idea that it's often a male that it's abusive towards a female person. But in my experience as a family counselor, I've come across many men who found themselves in situations of abuse, in situations of disrespect. And sometimes in the system, if you report, at least in Latin America, it happens often that when you report such a situation to the authorities, and you want to take legal action, sometimes the very same authorities might find it amusing or unbelievable that you, being physically bigger or stronger than a partner, that you might actually want to report the incident, and they may even question you to be in your manhood for allowing yourself to be in such a situation. So it's kind of a catch-22 situation if you report it, because then you might be emasculated by the system itself. And in other cases, if you do take matters into your own hands, then you might be labeled as someone who's abusive to your spouse or to your partner. I personally found myself in a situation, not taking it to a legal action, but I did find myself many years ago in a relationship that, in hindsight, I realized was abusive. A relationship where I was undermined, or where I was labeled as someone whose work was not important, whose capacity was not truthful. I was labeled as someone who conformed, someone who was mediocre, someone who didn't have any aspirations, even though none of these things were true. But I was bombarded with information that undermined everything from my skin color to my profession to my social interactions, and I was even shamed publicly, even in social media, by the person I was in that relationship with. So I myself witnessed firsthand, not only as a counselor but as an individual, that emotional abuse does exist and that it has no gender, that both men and women can be subject of such an abuse. Sometimes we need to get past that idea that that abuse is something that's exclusive only to males, or only to a certain nationality or a certain culture, because I think it happens in many cultures and it's fairly universal, unfortunately. The other thing that the series gets us to realize is that abuse and domestic violence can be cyclical. It could be something that can be transferred from generation to generation, and it can repeat itself in a person's history or in a family's history. And we have also the capacity to, in the same way that we learn it, we can also unlearn it, and that's the good news. We can also the other very important thing is that we can be in solidarity with such a person. We can be in solidarity with the person who is being abused, with the person who finds him or herself in a situation of domestic violence. But at the end of the day, the victim has to make the decision to step out of that situation. We can offer them all the resources, all the support, all the accompaniment, but at the end of the day, it's their decision. And it's when they make that decision that they go from being a victim to becoming a survivor. And sometimes that takes many tries until they finally are able to break loose out of that situation. So we should not be discouraged if the person maybe goes back and forth and maybe vacillates at making that decision, because it takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of courage and empowerment and realization of the situation that they're living in to be able to step out of that situation. Every situation of domestic abuse has a boundary, has a limit, and it's up to us to establish it. So it's also important that we acknowledge that that boundary or that line that needs to be drawn can vary from person to person. So it's not really up to us to judge. Why is this person taking so long, or why is it taking them? Why are they taking so much time to make up their mind? It might be very apparent to those of us who are watching it from the outside, but for the person who's in the middle of the storm, it may be very, very difficult. And especially if they grew up in such a similar situation, this may be way too ingrained and in their DNA, so that they almost kind of see it as natural, even though they might not enjoy it, they might not like it, and they might consciously be aware of the fact that this is not a good situation, but they may not have a clear sense emotionally as to how to work their way out of it. So it does take a lot of patience, a lot of understanding, and a lot of support. It's also important that the very first step that needs to be taken is for us to be able to put a name to the situation. half of the solution of any problem is being able to first name the problem. It's just like an illness. The moment you are able to name the illness, then you are able to also begin to explore what options of treatment exist for such an for such an illness. Well, the same thing happens with domestic violence. The very first thing that you have to do, and half of the solution is to be able to acknowledge and to name the situation that you find yourself in, to begin to transform it and to begin to work your way out of it. It does take a lot of respect and a lot of assertiveness on the part of the person naming the situation, and it takes a lot of self-respect. It takes a lot of integrity, honesty, vulnerability, authenticity, to be able to say, I find myself in this situation, I'm not proud of it, I don't like it, but I'm also able to change it. I'm also able to make important decisions for myself to be able to secure or to guarantee the safety of myself and my loved ones. At the end of the day, one of the things that we're striving for is for us to be able to recuperate or regain our voice. Because one of the things that happens when you find yourself in a situation of domestic abuse is that you begin to lose your voice. Not only do you lose heart, but you begin to lose your own voice and your capacity to be able to name and verbalize the situation that you're in. And you may begin to question the legitimacy for you to be able to raise your voice and to be able to say, no, stop, this is not acceptable, I would not tolerate this. And sometimes we confuse being patient, being understanding, being tolerant with putting up with things that should not be acceptable. If we're questioning ourselves, one of the things the exercise we can always make is to maybe imagine or picture a loved one of ours in the very same situation that we're in, if we're involved in a situation of domestic violence, and to begin to ask ourselves, what would my advice be if I saw my son or my daughter in this situation, or if I saw my brother or my sister or my best friend or my mom or my dad? What would be my recommendation to them if they were in the very same situation that I find myself in? And if you have a clear sense as to what needs to be done, if this was happening to someone that you love, then follow your own advice and begin to take the necessary steps to do for yourself what you would encourage a loved one of yours to do for him or for herself. At the end of the day, our freedom and our boldness in being able to stand up for ourselves and to set some boundaries can liberate other people who find themselves in the same situation. So I just wanted to share some of these reflections. I highly encourage you to check out that series Maid on Netflix, and write back, comment back, and share with me your impressions of it. How did it speak to you? If there was any particular scene or situation that spoke to you at a personal level that impacted you, and if you know of a friend who is in a situation of domestic violence, encourage them to check it out. It can be a life-changing experience for that person to begin to take whatever the necessary steps ought to be in order to step out of that situation of danger for themselves and for others around them who might not be able to make a decision on their own, especially children. So I hope this was helpful. I hope you have a great day. For any of you who are interested in exploring this or other topics with me, feel free to set up a counseling appointment by contacting my office at country code 506, and the number is 61863941. Again, country code 506 61863941. And you can always check this video out on my Instagram platform, but it's also going to be posted on my Facebook as well as my YouTube channel. So I hope that this is helpful, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Take care of yourself, and see you again in a week when we meet again for another edition of Mic Drop. Again, my name is Alex Rent, and I hope you have a wonderful and lovely day. Bye-bye.